The cameras kept rolling, but nobody knew what to do. Canon O'Brien stood frozen on stage, his signature smile vanishing as a voice from the audience cut through his punchline like a knife through silence. The entire studio froze. Producers whispered frantically into their headsets. Audience members turned in their seats, trying to see who had spoken. And in that moment, the most watched late-night show in America became something nobody expected. A window into the heart of a man who'd spent decades making people laugh, but had never shown them this. This is the story of 7 words that stopped Late Night with Canon O'Brien, and what happened next changed everything. It was a Thursday evening taping at the Canon O'Brien studios in New York City. The energy was electric, as it always was when Late Night recorded. The iconic blue and gold set sparkled under the stage lights, the famous Late Night with Canon O'Brien logo glowing behind Canon's desk. 200 audience members filled the theater, their anticipation palpable as they waited for Canon to work his magic. Canon was in his element that night. The tall, red-haired host wore his perfectly tailored navy suit, his infectious energy filling every corner of the studio. He'd just finished his opening monologue, delivering jokes about the day's headlines with that perfect timing that had made him a household name. The audience was laughing, the cameras were capturing every moment, and everything was going exactly as planned. But in the third row, seat 47, something was about to happen that would shatter every protocol, every script, every expectation that held the show together. Robert Martinez sat quietly among the other audience members. At 68 years old, he looked older than his years. His weathered face told stories of hardship. His clothes were clean but worn, and he clutched a small canvas bag that contained everything he owned in the world. What the audience didn't know was that Robert had walked 7 miles in the rain to be there that night. Robert was a Vietnam veteran who had been living on the streets of New York for 3 years. Every night, when the library closed and he had nowhere else to go, he would find a 24-hour diner or a bus station with a television, and every night he would watch Late Night with Canon O'Brien. It was his anchor, his connection to a world that seemed to have forgotten him. The show progressed normally for the first segment. Canon interviewed a popular actress about her new movie, cracked jokes about her awkward red carpet moments, and had the audience in stitches. The energy was infectious, the laughter genuine. Everything was running like clockwork. But during the second segment, as Canon transitioned into his famous Everyday Heroes bit, everything changed. You know, Canon said, settling into his desk chair with that easy confidence, everyone talks about heroes like they're these larger-than-life figures, but real heroes are the people who come home after a long day, sink into their comfortable couch, and still find energy to care about others. The audience chuckled appreciatively. It was a warm, relatable sentiment. Canon continued with his trademark blend of humor and heart. I mean, let's be honest, we've all been there. You get home, you've got your favorite chair, maybe a cup of coffee, and you're watching some devastatingly handsome talk show host make jokes about the news. More laughter. Canon was building to something, setting up what the audience expected would be another perfectly timed punchline. And even though you're tired, even though you just want to relax in your cozy living room, I don't have a living room. The words cut through Canon's sentence like a physical force. The laughter died instantly. Canon stopped mid-word, his mouth still open, his perfectly rehearsed timing completely derailed. The studio fell silent. Not the expectant silence of an audience waiting for a punchline, but the heavy, uncomfortable silence of 200 people suddenly confronted with something real, something unscripted, something that didn't belong on television. Canon looked toward the audience, shielding his eyes from the stage lights, trying to locate the source of the voice. The camera swung toward the crowd, producers in the control room frantically trying to decide whether to cut away, and then everyone saw him. Robert Martinez, standing slowly in seat 47, his small canvas bag clutched to his chest. Canon's professional instincts kicked in first. He'd handled interruptions before, managed unexpected moments with grace and humor. "Well," he said with a slight smile, I guess we've got a minimalist in the audience tonight, but Robert didn't sit down. He didn't smile at the attempted joke. Instead, he stepped into the aisle, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the studio lean forward. I haven't had a home for 3 years, Robert said, his voice steady but loud enough for the microphones to pick up clearly. But every night I find a place with a TV and I watch you because you make me laugh when I've forgotten how. The silence deepened. Canon's smile faded completely. This wasn't a heckler or someone looking for attention. This was something else entirely. Every night for 3 years, Robert continued, his voice growing stronger, in diners, in bus stations, in the library when it's open, I watch you because you remind me that there's still good in the world. You give me hope when I don't have anything else. Behind the scenes, a producer made a decision that defied every network expectation. Keep the cameras rolling, don't cut away. The world needed to see this. Canon stood up slowly from his desk. Not the quick, performative movements of a talk show host, but the careful, deliberate movements of a man suddenly confronted with something far more important than entertainment. "Sir," Canon said, his voice stripped of all performance, all practice charm. "What's your name?" "Robert Martinez," the man replied. "Sergeant Robert Martinez, United States Army, Vietnam." Those words hit the studio like a thunderclap. This wasn't just a homeless man. This was a veteran, someone who had served his country and somehow ended up forgotten, invisible, watching late-night television in places most people would never have to see. Canon's face changed. The cameras caught it all. The moment when the entertainer became something more, when the professional mask slipped away to reveal the human being underneath. "Sergeant Martinez," Canon said, and now his voice carried a respect that transcended show business. "How long were you in Vietnam?" "2 tours," Robert replied. 1968 to 1970, I was 19 when I shipped out. Came back a different person. The audience was completely silent now. Some were crying. Others sat with their hands pressed to their mouths, overwhelmed by the raw honesty of the moment. Canon looked at his production team, then back at Robert. Then he did something that in 30 years of television he'd never done. He walked out from behind his desk, down the stage steps, and directly into the audience. The studio was no longer a talk show set. It had become something else entirely, a sacred space where protocol didn't matter, where ratings didn't matter, where the only thing that mattered was a man who had served his country and was now living on the streets. Canon reached Robert's row. The audience members moved aside, creating a path. He stopped in front of the veteran, and for the first time in the entire taping, Canon O'Brien wasn't performing. He wasn't the host. He wasn't the comedian. He was just a man looking at another man who had given everything and received nothing in return. "Sergeant Martinez," Canon said softly, "thank you for your service." Robert's composure cracked. The tears came first, then the kind of sobs that come from years of being invisible, of being forgotten, of watching the world move on without acknowledgement of the sacrifice he had made. "I never got a welcome home," Robert whispered. "When I came back, people spat on us, called us names. I've been trying to find my place ever since." Canon reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his pocket square, the pristine white fabric he always kept perfectly folded. Without a word, he gently wiped the tears from Robert's weathered face. "You have a place," Canon said firmly. "You have a place right here." But Canon wasn't done. He began to remove his jacket, the navy blue suit jacket that had become part of his television persona. He slipped it off, and with a reverence usually reserved for flag ceremonies, he draped it over Robert's shoulders. "This studio, this show, this is your home now," Canon said. "And I want everyone watching to understand something. This man fought for our freedom when he was just a kid. He came back to a country that didn't appreciate his sacrifice, and for 3 years he's been living on the streets while we sit in our comfortable homes." The audience rose to their feet. Not because they were cued to, not because a producer signaled them, but because they couldn't stay seated. This wasn't applause. This was recognition, acknowledgement, a standing ovation for a man who had been invisible for too long. Canon turned to address the entire studio, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "Sergeant Martinez, you said I give you hope, but you've got it backwards. You're giving me hope. You're reminding me what real strength looks like, what real courage is. It's not telling jokes on television. It's surviving when the world has forgotten you." He placed his hand on Robert's shoulder, the gesture both protective and proud. "You know what we're going to do?" Canon announced to the studio. "We're going to make sure Sergeant Martinez gets the welcome home he never received, because that's what we do for our heroes. That's what we do for family." The cameras captured every moment as Canon led Robert up onto the stage. The veteran, wearing Canon's oversized jacket like a Medal of Honor, walked slowly but with dignity toward the desk where millions watch celebrities tell their stories every night. Canon sat Robert in the guest chair, the same chair where movie stars and musicians had promoted their latest projects. But Robert's story was more important than any Hollywood blockbuster. "Ladies and gentlemen," Canon said, turning to address the audience and the cameras, "I want you to meet Sergeant Robert Martinez. He's been watching our show for 3 years, not from a cozy living room, but from wherever he could find a television." The conversation that followed wasn't really an interview. It was a moment between two men, one who had everything, one who had nothing, both discovering what truly mattered. Robert talked about Vietnam, about losing friends, about coming home to a country that seemed ashamed of his service. He talked about the years that followed, the struggles with nightmares and memories, the jobs that didn't last. "After my wife left, after I lost the last job, I just gave up," Robert said. "Figured maybe I was meant to disappear. But then I started watching you and you reminded me that there's still laughter in the world, still kindness." Canon listened with the intensity of a man hearing something life-changing. When Robert finished, Canon was quiet for a long moment. "Sergeant," Canon finally said, "you didn't disappear. You were just waiting for the right moment to reappear. And that moment is now." When the cameras finally stopped rolling, Canon didn't send Robert back to the streets. He personally drove him to a hotel, paid for a month's stay, and connected him with veteran services that had been trying to reach him for years. But more than that, Canon kept his promise. The next night, instead of his usual monologue, Canon delivered a tribute to forgotten veterans. He established the Robert Martinez Welcome Home Foundation, dedicated to helping homeless veterans find housing and support. The jacket Canon gave Robert that night became a symbol. Robert had it framed, not because it was expensive, but because it represented the moment when someone saw him, truly saw him, for the first time in years. Within a month, Robert had an apartment, access to VA benefits he didn't know existed, and a community of veterans who understood his struggle. But perhaps most importantly, he had his dignity back. The episode, when it aired, became the most watched late night with Canon O'Brien in the show's history, not because of the entertainment value, but because viewers witnessed something increasingly rare in modern media: authentic human connection. Canon received thousands of letters from veterans sharing their own stories, from civilians offering help, from families inspired to reach out to the forgotten heroes in their own communities. The empty chair in Canon's audience section, seat 47, became known as Robert's chair. Every show, it was reserved for a veteran, a reminder that heroes shouldn't have to be invisible. And Canon? He learned something that changed how he approached every show, every joke, every moment in front of those cameras. He learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop talking and start listening. Years later, when interviewers asked Canon about that night, he would say, "Robert thought I was giving him hope, but he was giving me purpose. He reminded me that behind every laugh there's a human being who needs to know they matter." The jacket hangs in Robert's apartment now next to his Bronze Star and Purple Heart, medals he'd kept hidden for decades, ashamed of service his country seemed to regret. Now they hang proudly, symbols of sacrifice finally recognized. Robert became a regular presence in the studio, not as a guest, but as family. He would sit in his chair watching Canon work his magic, but now Canon would often catch his eye during the show and share a knowing smile. The Invisible Man had become the heart of the show. The foundation Canon established grew beyond anyone's expectations. Within 5 years, it had helped over 2,000 homeless veterans find housing, health care, and hope. Robert became its face, traveling to speak at events, sharing his story, proving that one moment of recognition could change everything. But perhaps the most powerful change was in the show itself. Canon began ending every episode the same way, looking directly into the camera and saying, "Remember, behind every face you see, there's a story worth hearing. Don't let anyone become invisible on your watch." The crew members who were there that night still talk about it in reverent tones. They describe it as the moment when television remembered its true purpose, not just to entertain, but to connect, to heal, to remind us of our shared humanity. Studio security now keeps a list of local shelters and veteran services ready to help anyone who needs it. The production assistants know to look for signs that someone in the audience might need more than just entertainment. Because on that Thursday night in New York, 7 words from a forgotten veteran stopped a television show. But what really happened was much more profound. A nation remembered how to honor its heroes, a comedian discovered his true calling, and a man who had been invisible for 3 years was finally seen. The cameras stopped rolling that night, but the impact never did. Robert's story became a movement. Veterans across the country began reaching out, sharing their own experiences of invisibility and hope. The show received over 50,000 letters in the first month after the episode aired. Canon established not just a foundation, but a network of support that spread from city to city. Local businesses began hiring veterans, communities started recognizing their forgotten heroes, and families began having conversations about service and sacrifice that they'd never had before. The studio itself became a pilgrimage site of sorts. Veterans would travel from across the country just to sit in seat 47, to feel the same recognition that Robert had experienced. Canon made sure they were always welcomed, always seen, always honored. Robert's transformation was remarkable to witness. Within 6 months, he had not only found stable housing, but had become the foundation's most effective advocate. His speeches at veteran events were powerful not because of their polish, but because of their authenticity. He spoke with the voice of someone who had lived the darkness and found the light. 3 years ago, I was invisible, he would tell audiences. I thought I was forgotten, worthless, a burden on society. But one night, in a television studio, a man saw me, really saw me. And that changed everything, not just for me, but for thousands of veterans who are still out there, still invisible, still waiting for someone to see them. The foundation grew beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Corporate sponsors lined up to support it. Other celebrities joined the cause. But Canon always insisted that Robert remain at the center of it all, that his voice be the one that defined the mission. The late-night television landscape began to change as well. Other hosts started incorporating more meaningful content into their shows, inspired by the raw power of that moment when entertainment became ministry. The competition was no longer about who could get the biggest laughs, but about who could create the most genuine human connections. Canon's own evolution was perhaps the most profound. He had always been funny, always been charming, but after that night with Robert, he became something more, a healer, a voice for the voiceless, a man who understood that his platform was not just about entertainment, but about elevation. Every year on the anniversary of that night, Canon would have Robert back on the show. Not for ratings, not for publicity, but to remind the world that the forgotten deserve to be remembered, that the invisible deserve to be seen, that every human being has a story worth telling. The legacy of that Thursday night continues to grow. Film students analyze the footage in their classes, studying it as an example of authentic human connection in media. Journalism schools use it as a case study in the power of unscripted moments. But perhaps most importantly, it serves as a reminder that in our fast-paced, scripted world, the most powerful moments often come when we stop following the plan and start following our hearts. When we choose compassion over protocol, Humanity over entertainment. Robert Martinez, the invisible man who became the heart of a movement, still lives in New York. His apartment is modest but filled with letters from veterans he's helped, photos from,